Well, hello, family of God. Thank you for joining us again today. And just want to remind you that next week we have the opportunity to gather together in person for those of you who are comfortable with that, and to worship together, a service that will be held outdoors at Denver Christian School. And for those of you who can't make that for whatever reason, we're going to attempt or do our best to live stream that service and also post it online. So keep your eyes on the connections for details about how you can participate in our corporate worship next week. But this week, as we think about this chapter from Genesis, or this passage from Genesis 32, I want to invite you to begin by thinking about this question. The question is, what is it that keeps you up at night? You know, what's that one thing that seems to constantly nag at you? That issue or that concern in your life that's maybe always lurking in the background that you can't quite ever let go of, maybe even now, while you're listening to a sermon. For some of you, maybe it's one of the big things that grabs the headlines every morning. It's the coronavirus, the latest numbers, the graphs and the charts and the trends there. Or it's the economy, or the upcoming election, or maybe the unrest and the injustices that continue to plague our city and our nation. For others of you, maybe it's something that seems smaller, at least to those who are on the outside looking in, but that's nonetheless very significant to you in your life. Maybe it's trouble with a friend, or the start of the upcoming school year. Maybe there's strain in your marriage, or an issue you've got to deal with at work. Maybe it's that child or grandchild who seems to have walked away from the church. The list of possibilities is long, maybe especially long in 2020, but today I just want you to think about one thing. What's one thing that keeps you up at night? Well, I think that if you had asked Jacob that question, Jacob would not have needed to think twice about an answer. And what is it that keeps Jacob up at night? What, in fact, has him pacing along the banks of the river Jabbok, maybe wringing his hands, pulling at his earlock at the beginning of our chapter? Well, that's a pretty easy one for Jacob. What keeps him up at night, his main concern in life, right? The trouble that just he can't quite seem to shake. It's his big brother, his twin and lifelong nemesis, Esau. Now, if you're not familiar with the relationship between Jacob and Esau, I'd encourage you to maybe even just pause the video now, go back to Genesis 25 and read a few chapters to get a little good background information. But if you don't want to do that, well, you should at least know this much about the relationship between these two brothers. You should know that, well, to say that it's never been especially good, that would be a vast understatement. I mean, this relationship, it's been fraught from the beginning. In fact, Genesis actually tells us that the two of them, Jacob and Esau, were trying to pummel each other in their mother's womb. And then you read on, you see that once they're born, things only deteriorate from there. In fact, a time came that Jacob did something so kind of sneaky and underhanded and nasty to his big brother Esau that Esau was so furious that he swore he was going to kill this little sneaky pipsqueak. And Jacob believed him. So Jacob took off, maybe decided to give his brother a little space, a little time to cool down. He hid out at his uncle Laban's for a while. Now, 4 chapters, 20 years later, Jacob is back. Jacob is back, and Esau is coming to greet him. And Esau, it seems, is not coming alone. Esau is showing up for this family reunion in kind of a funny way. He's taking 400 men with him. Not a particularly good sign that Esau is going to just let bygones be bygones. So Jacob does what Jacob does. Jacob spends his day hatching a plan, trying to figure out how he can best smooth things over with Esau and ultimately save his own skin. Whole first half of this chapter is all about that. It takes Jacob, I imagine, from dawn until dusk. It takes him all day, but now it's night. Right? It's dark. Jacob is alone. Jacob can't sleep. So Jacob, I imagine, is pacing by the banks of that river back and forth, worrying, wondering how things are going to go that next morning with Esau. Wondering how things are going to turn out. He's there by himself, worrying and wondering, when wham! Out of nowhere, it seems, a stranger attacks Jacob and wrestles him to the ground. The two of them grapple with each other for hours, but Jacob can never quite get a good look at him. It's dark. And the stranger, for his part, he never identifies himself to Jacob. But I suspect Jacob's got a hunch about who this is. And I suspect that as Jacob wrestles with this stranger, that he probably thinks it's his brother. It's Esau that he's striving with in the middle of the night. And I suspect that Jacob probably thinks Esau probably snuck up on him, wanted to do a sneak attack, and jumped him from behind when he wasn't looking, because that's exactly the kind of thing Jacob would have done to Esau. So yeah, I think Jacob thinks it's Esau, but of course you and I, we've read the rest of the story, so we know better. We know it's not Esau, but it's the angel of the Lord. It's God that Jacob is wrestling with in the night. Friends, that struck me as a good picture of how I think it often goes in our lives too. When we toss and turn at night, we may think we're wrestling with a brother or a spouse or a family member. We may think that our struggle is with our finances or with our health, with the state of our country, or our Facebook friends. We may think that's who we're wrestling with, but we're not. Not really. Because really, our struggle is with God. That's what John Calvin actually says in his really thought-provoking commentary on this text. It took a while to settle in for me, but I trust that you can get it. What Calvin says is that this text is here to teach us, among other things, that in times of trials and temptations, here's the quote, our business is always with God. I love that. I want you to think about it. He says, in times of trials and temptations, our business is always with God. I think that's right on. We think as our days go by that our business is with our family members, or our business is with our finances, or with our colleagues, or with our elected officials. We think that's what we've got to deal with. That's who our business is with. But Calvin says, no. No, he says, our business is always with God. Because we, all of us, Calvin says, are people who are called to wrestle with God. So that's who we are. Right? That's our identity. That's what it means to live as a child, as children of Israel, and ultimately to live as children of God. Another preacher summarizes it this way, paraphrasing him. He says, from Scripture's perspective, God's people are those who are willing to go toe-to-toe with God. Those who continually struggle with Him and strive to understand His ways. Those who insist on holding Him to His promises and who cling to Him in tenacious faith and stubborn hope until they have finally received the blessing that He has promised. That's who we are as children of Israel. I mean, that's what the name means. It means those who wrestle with the God who wants to wrestle with them. That's the picture. You know, I've been thinking about this picture all week, and I still don't know what to make of it. In fact, I'm still not sure I like it, and maybe some of you don't like this picture of God and our relationship with God either. I mean, maybe you prefer a softer, gentler version of God. Maybe you prefer God, the loving shepherd who tenderly cradles us in his arms. Or a less biblical picture, but one we nevertheless carry with us, many of us, God, the doting grandfather. Maybe doting but clueless grandfather, as C.S. Lewis says. The doting grandfather who wants nothing more than to ensure that the young people enjoy themselves and that a good time is had by all. Or maybe you prefer a picture of God that keeps him a bit more at a distance. You know, God, the colleague at work. Or maybe even God, the employee. You know, God who's willing to sit down with you in your prayer list in the morning, who's willing to tackle the things in your to-do list that you want to assign him, but God who also knows better than to interfere with your personal life. God who knows not to bother you when you are at home. And that may be the God that you and I want. But according to Genesis 32, that's not the God we get. For that matter, that's not the God we don't just. That's just not the God we don't get in Genesis 32. That's not the God we get in Jesus Christ. Because what we see in Jesus Christ is that in Jesus Christ we have a God who is determined to mix it up with us. And so God in Christ, and then God by his Spirit, he comes to us. And yes, God comes and he heals and he forgives and he loves and he corrects and he convicts. And yes, sometimes he does that as a gentle and loving shepherd, and sometimes he does it maybe as a tender mother dealing with a tearful child. But other times, right? Other times, God comes to us as a stranger in the night. Right? Wham! God comes to us and he tackles us from behind when we least expect it. He insists on taking us to the mat and wrestling with us until the break of day. I don't know why God chooses to deal with us this way. Sometimes maybe it's just because he needs to get our attention and there's no other way. For his part, John Calvin says that God comes, he wrestles with us because he wants to test us and he wants to strengthen our faith. He wants to make us stronger. And there's probably something to all that, but I wonder if there's something else going on here too. And one of the cherished memories I have from when my children were young were those times after dinner when we'd end up on the living room floor wrestling with each other. My kids would be climbing all over me. You know, I'd have one on my shoulder, one on my back, one trying to take out my legs, and sometimes I'd let them win. I'd let them pin me. But other times I might roar up from the ground like a giant sea monster. While my kids hung on, I would kind of shake them around, move them around, and then I would pin them. And I might not just pin them. Sometimes I might sit on top of them, and then I'd tickle them under their chin or in their ribs until they were giggling and laughing and gasping for air and begging me to stop. I tell you, it was really wonderful. Maybe it sounds terrible to you, but I thought it was wonderful. I think my kids did too. In fact, I wish in hindsight we had done more of it. I wish we had done more of it because, well, I think even at the time I sensed what many studies I've seen have confirmed. I sensed that those evening sessions of wrestling, of tossing together on the floor, were good for us. That they changed and strengthened our relationship. Right? They didn't just make us stronger, they made our relationship stronger. And this is not a perfect metaphor, I know, I understand that, but I think this is how it is with us and God too. And when we wrestle with God, when we are forced to struggle with Him, sometimes through long, long nights, it changes our relationship. I mean, just notice what happens with Jacob. The text says us that it's in the struggle with God that Jacob finally is able to see and to behold the face of God. If you read on, actually, to the end of chapter 33, you see something else. You see that it's after Jacob wrestles with God. Well, it's after this that Jacob finally comes to embrace God as his God, right? He's no longer just the God of Abraham. He's no longer just the God of Isaac. Jacob's able to say, he's my God. He's never said that before. But he's only able to say it after he wrestles with God. That's how it works, right? It's in the struggle that we come to behold the face of God in a new way. And it's in the struggle that we come to embrace and know that we are embraced by God in a new way. I mean, isn't that true in the people that you know? I mean, just think of someone you know whose faith and life with God you admire and respect. Isn't it true that they've had to struggle and to wrestle with God too? I was thinking again of my brother, John, this week. Some of you know, nearly 3 years ago, John had a very life-altering accident at work. And it's been life-altering because the recovery's been long and difficult. It's been incomplete. There's been ongoing repercussions. That's a story for another day, but to suffice it to say, in the last 3 years, there's been a lot of struggle. A lot of struggle with God. John has had to wrestle with God through many, many nights. But John would say that as a result of that struggle, as a result of that wrestling, his relationship with God has changed. I think he would say that through the struggle and as a result of all this wrestling, he's come to see and know and embrace God in a new and profound way that he never had before. And friends, I want to encourage you with that. I don't know what it is you're struggling with. I don't know what it is that keeps you up at night. But I want to say to you today, whatever it is, don't give up. Right? Don't tap out. Don't toss in the towel. But keep striving. Keep struggling. Keep wrestling, and keep wrestling not just with your finances, or not just with your grief and loss, not just with your anxieties about the future, not just with your heartache about your relationship. Keep wrestling with God. Right? Keep struggling to know His will. Keep clinging to His promises. Keep pressing Him for His blessings. Friends, keep wrestling with God. Keep wrestling all through the night, and when the new day finally breaks, allow yourself to collapse into His embrace. And then let Him take you by the hand and lead you home. Grace and peace, dear friends. May God lend you His strength, even as you struggle with Him this week.